This episode is brought to you by Card Kingdom. Go to cardkingdom.com/studies to pick up some Kamigawa cards, old and new, for your commander decks and your collection. This episode is also sponsored by my new partner, Coalesce Apparel and Design. Use code STUDIES at checkout for 10% off clothing and stickers, including Rhystic Studies t-shirts and hoodies that feature my brand new logo. Just south of the archipelago of Japan, on the island of Yakushima, an early morning bus ride delivers small groups of ambitious hikers to the mouth of the Anbo trailhead. From here, following an old logging train track, hikers begin their journey into the forest. Soon the terrain shifts as the flat tracks become wooden ladders and narrow steps. The Okabu Trail is much more challenging, but keeping the hikers company is a primordial blanket of ancient trees. A sense of calm permeates the overgrowth as time slows down. The forest is quiet. Only here does Shinrin-yoku reach its full effect. Then, after hours of climbing the wooden steps that lead to the summit of Yakushima Island, they see it. Jomon Sugi, one of the oldest trees in the world. Any lingering discomfort from the grueling hike disappears in the presence of the tree. Its age transcends written human history, and still it continues to grow. Back on the mainland, near the hot springs of Kaga in the Ishikawa prefecture, there grows another ancient cedar. Standing 180 feet tall, the Great Sugi of Kayano welcomes visitors to the Sugawara shrine behind it. This tree is deemed sacred. Wrapping around its massive trunk is a Shimenawa rope, which denotes the presence of a Kodama, the spirit that inhabits trees. Deep within the Jukai forest grows a third cedar tree which shares an affinity with these two Sugi. Also wrapped in Shimenawa rope and towering above the forest, this tree possesses a Kodama of her own. But in order to witness Boseiju, the sacred mother, we must cross the liminal boundary between reality and fantasy. The bridge between these two worlds, however, is short, if but a few steps. On the other side is the vibrant storybook world of Kamigawa, a living facsimile of the history of the country that inspired it, a world whose myths and locales and peoples are mirrors of our own. At the onset of building the world of Kamigawa back in the very early 2000s, the top-down planes of Innistrad, Theros, Amonkhet, and Kaldheim did not yet exist. Beyond Arabian Nights, there was no blueprint of how to translate living lore into the game world. The previous setting of Mirrodin was closer in concept to science fiction than it was to high fantasy, and Bill Rose, the president of R&D at the time, insisted that the creative team use mythology as their primary source material to develop the following block. After attending a distributors meeting in Tokyo, he returned to Northwest Washington adamant that Magic's next setting would invoke the trappings and imagery of feudal Japan. Brady Dommermuth, the creative director, was not convinced, and quickly identified 4 areas of difficulty with this pursuit. 1. What would be considered mythology in the ancient Greek or Norse culture is current religious practice in Japanese culture. 2. Many Westerners just don't know much about ancient or feudal Japan beyond samurai and ninja. 3. Many Westerners confuse Chinese or Korean cultural elements with Japanese, or worse, they don't think the differences are significant. And 4. Most Westerners simply aren't familiar with the creatures and magic of Japanese lore. Dommermuth's predictions about his audience were correct. Nearly 2 decades have passed since the publication of this article, and yet most of these worries still ring true. Combined with a slew of mechanical issues and lackluster game design, Kamigawa was a terrific failure as a commercial product. It sold poorly, and players struggled with exactly what the creative team anticipated above. But despite its troubled past, the richness and depth of this world still offers exploration and intrigue. In many ways, Kamigawa was far ahead of its time, and only through retrospect can we understand and respect all the efforts that led to its creation. We can start with the symbol of Champions of Kamigawa, the first set in the block. This is a torii gate. The torii gate is perhaps the most instantly recognizable and iconographic image associated with Japan, well, beyond pop culture exports like Hello Kitty and that cheerful electric mouse. The structure is prolific in the country, and each one marks the entrance to a Shinto shrine, called a jinja. Before entering a jinja, one must purify themselves with water at basins located just outside the shrine, and once within, they can pay their respects to the kami, the spirits that live in everything. As with all sacred spaces, ritual and etiquette is involved in every step of worship. But Shinto is not a religion, it is a practice, a tradition, a way of behaving more than a way of believing. Shinto is at the core of Kamigawa's storytelling. Unlike other religions that have been codified into the game world, like the Church of Abysin for example, Kamigawa was explicit about its ties to a real-world theological counterpart. As will become apparent, the separation between reality and fantasy was tenuous in this block, and future top-down worlds would learn from the risks associated with staying too close to the source material in the final product. Because of this, we can treat Kamigawa as a sort of museum, a viewing gallery to learn about Japan, where nearly every card has an analog in the real world. Take, for example, Ebony Owl Netsuke. Tournament players will recognize it as a key piece to the popular Owling Mine combo deck from this era. Netsuke, however, are not a fantasy invention. They were tiny sculptures that adorns the kimono of merchants throughout the 17th century. Acting as a counterbalance to small crafted boxes called inro that carried accoutrement like tobacco or medicine, Netsuke were highly detailed trinkets that attached to the top of the sash called an obi. Typically carved in ivory or cypress wood, these ornaments signaled wealth for a social class that was otherwise not allowed to flaunt their economic success. Ornate kansashi also points to another traditional Japanese craft. Dating back to as early as the Jomon period, kansashi have fluctuated in popularity, utility, and appearance for centuries. In the modern era, brides, maiko, and even young girls wear kansashi in their hair for wedding ceremonies or coming-of-age celebrations. In 1982, tsumami kansashi, which feature intricate flower designs made of pinched and folded cloth, were officially designated as traditional handcraft in Tokyo. Alongside Netsuke and kansashi, Kamigawa also showcases traditional Japanese weapons, instruments, and items used in Shinto rituals. The jite, or jute for example, flourished in the Edo period within members of the military and police. To bring a sword into the shogun's palace was a crime punishable by death, so alternative weapons like the jite became standard issue for the guard. Umezawa's here seems to be made of iron, but some jite were made of wood. In either case, the weapon was a blunt object, not sharp like a sai might be. The hook there, called a kagi, was used to snag at clothing, push into weak joints, or even grab at a victim's open mouth or nose. The koto is an instrument whose 13 strings sound instantly recognizable. As seen in this video by Rob Scallon featuring Tokiko Kimura, real koto are much bigger than that depicted in the card illustration, and they lay flat along a surface, not held like a guitar. While one hand plucks the strings behind the movable ivory bridges, the other bends them to create slight shifts and accents in pitch. Here's a woodblock print by Katsushika Hokusai from circa 1800, which depicts a woman carrying what would later become recognized as the national instrument of Japan. Even cards as innocuous as long-forgotten gohei provide insight into Japanese history and tradition. Used by priests to cleanse a sacred place or bless objects carrying negative energy, gohei are wooden wands decorated with 2 zigzagging shide, streamers made of paper. This card also hints at the central point of tension of the Kamigawa story. Between the name and flavor text, we get the impression that that which was holy has turned against those who once revered it. This was the narrative crux of the block. Pitched as Shinto gone wrong, Kamigawa's primary conflict was a clash between the mortal world, called Utsushio, and the spirit realm, called Kakuryō. Driving the narrative was Kanda, Lord of Iganjo, who stole the essence of the supreme kami deity called Okagachi in search of immortality, thus initiating the 20 years Kami War. As spirits tore through the veil and invaded Kamigawa, the citizens of the plane faced not just their mortality, but the total dissolution of a sanctified world. The psychological trauma of the war permeates the entirety of the block, from the grandiose events to the mundane normalities of daily life.
Once we prayed to the Kaijin for safe voyage. Now we only pray that we can escape their gaze. Hayato, Master Sailor.
It seemed an easy thing to step into the nothingness, to fall, to die. But then for an instant I saw it, eyes filled with endless sorrow, and I turned back to face my pain. Snowfur, Kitsune poet.
As I died, I rejoiced. I would see my family again. But then I woke up, back on the battlefield, back in Kamigawa, back in hell.
That third piece on Yomiji Who Bars the Way was written by my esteemed guest for this episode, Rei Nakazawa.
My name is Rei Nakazawa. I've been writing for and about games for half my life now, but over half my life now, but it all started with Magic.
I called Rei for insight into writing flavor text for Kamigawa. So much of world building lives in snippets of italicized text, and I was curious about the stories that he and his colleagues sought to tell in the margins of these cards.
I saw them once when I was a child. They led me to my parents' arms when I was lost. Why have they abandoned me now? Why won't they take me home again? Unnamed beggar.
One piece of flavor text that comes up quite a bit that I didn't write. I think J. Moldenhauer Salazar did write. It was Wandering Ones. And I think that sort of captures the immediate mood very well. This idea that things are going wrong, that there was a time where things were better and now they're getting worse for reasons that the average person doesn't understand yet. The idea just to give a sense, of just how serious this is, that, these are mortals fighting against their own gods and how big a deal that is.
The motif of common folk facing a tradition that has betrayed them also appears in this suite of flavor text penned by Nakazawa. The Orochi are one of 5 humanoid creatures of Kamigawa. They populate the Jukai forest, and, like the other tribes, they must reconcile with the inversion of their truths.
The young come to me confused. They've been taught to respect the kami, and now they must fight them? I do not know what to say. Sachi, to her father.
Nothing is the same anymore. The forests are not as lush, the water not as pure, the air not as clear. Without the kami to direct and sustain the forces of nature, it's only a matter of time before we feel their neglect.
Gale Force and Stone Rain are also Nakazawa at work. Here, the kami weaponize their control over weather events in order to destroy the world. The balance of power has shifted entirely, leaving the citizens of Kamigawa helpless against an omnipotent foe.
I followed a few keywords here, one being desperate. I really wanted to get across that sense of danger being everywhere, of how serious the situation was. But I'd say some of that whimsical mood does creep in. In the end, things do work out. Kamigawa does survive in some form, so there is a little bit of room to ease off on the despair and the hopelessness that some of the flavor texts express, because we, at least the reader, do know it eventually does get better somehow, which I think is important, because I don't think this is a set that would have benefited from sort of a relentless mood of doom that, some other settings have played with.
Along with maintaining a contrast between despair and whimsy, Nakazawa used flavor text as an opportunity to turn game mechanics into narratives. What happens to the Orochi when they die? Sakura Tribe Elder answers this question with a lovely image of death sprouting new life. There were no tombstones in Orochi territory. Slain warriors were buried with a tree sapling, so they would become a part of the forest after death.
Sakura Tribe Elder doesn't come up so much as flavor text, but that's another example of, like I said, of filling in gaps, details of the world that were too fine to, even put in the style guide.
Another beautiful detail that may go overlooked are the writings of Noboru, a master kite maker who Nakazawa wrote into existence on 3 cards. His dedication to his craft is emblematic of many Japanese who carry on traditions that defy advancements in digital and industrial technologies. The kansashi I mentioned earlier are just one of so many art forms that take decades to master. Woodblock printmaking comes to mind too, as well as the slow, methodical arts of kumiko, which assembles tiny slates of wood into dazzling wall murals without the use of nails or adhesives. As we slowly lose touch with the magic of making something with our hands, from materials that grow in the dirt, the kite maker reminds us.
The jeweler, the potter, the smith, they all imbue a bit of their souls into their creations. The kami destroy that crafted mortal shell and absorb the soul within. Noboru, master kite maker.
The concept of Shinto gone wrong comes through in the second line here, and points to what I believe was Kamigawa's greatest world-building error. All stories must present conflict, but the premise of kami attacking the mortal realm simply doesn't make sense in the context of Shinto values. Because Shinto considers human beings as fundamentally pure, and because there are no strict moral or ethical codes to follow if you wish to practice, there is also no sense of punishment for disregarding Shinto traditions. Participating in rites of passage, visiting shrines, and placing emphasis on life more than the afterlife all coalesce into a form of collective respect for the health of the world. In many ways, Shinto is a fundamentally environmentalist form of animism. But the idea of kami turning against the living is too far-fetched, even when gamified, and it mischaracterizes Shinto as a vengeful ideology. Similarly, the design of the kami is misrepresentative of the spirits that inhabit all things in Shinto. It is clear that they were intentionally concepted to appear otherworldly. Many of the spirits are adorned with floating appendages and impossible body shapes. Admittedly, the challenge of painting the immaterial and invisible is difficult, but these kami come through the breach looking more like creatures of a drug-induced psychedelic dream world. In a different high fantasy setting, on another of Magic's infinite planes, these designs would be excellent. But because Kamigawa stayed so close to Shinto at its foundation, it wrote itself directly into a corner at the level of appropriate representation. In other words, yeah, these kami look really cool, but I don't think they should have been kami in the first place. Returning to Damarmuth's list of worries, it is true that most Westerners simply aren't familiar with the creatures and magic of Japanese lore, let alone the spiritual practices that have traditions spanning generations. And so presenting kami as threatening monsters did no service to players who otherwise did not know any better. Had Kamigawa's original name Inreikai been used, which translates roughly to the dark spiritual world, this premise would have been forever ingrained into the plane's identity. Instead, the creative team went with the backup name, which was easier to pronounce. Kamigawa, the River of the Gods, stayed very close to Japan for its inspiration, and aside from this twist on Shinto, it was also built with a lot of care.
This was a relatively early attempt to connect a magic world with an average culture. So there was a certain feeling of responsibility, especially for someone like me whose father is actually from that country, to, I guess, reflect well on its basis. Like I said, I wanted to do justice to the existing tradition, even though obviously they weren't exactly the same.
In fact, there was originally a desire to lean even further into Japanese terminology for card names. The idea was to have a simple card name, something innocuous like Fearsome Ogre, carry an anglicized Japanese name underneath it in a subtitle text box. This may have helped mitigate the culture gap and give tournament players an easier handle on pronunciation and decklist transcription. The cycle of legendary dragons, too, were originally slated to have longer names to instill them with a sense of grandiosity. The Red Dragon's full name was originally Ryusei the Falling Star, Lord of the Sokenzen Heights. Such a text box treatment wouldn't take shape until 15 years later in the Ikoria expansion, and I think there's a lot of potential to make use of this tech in future Magic sets. In taking Damarmuth's worries as a challenge to myself to learn more about Japan, I'd like to look at a few more cards that connect the game world to legitimate Japanese history and culture. The first is here on Kumano, Master Yamabushi. The illustration by Adam Rex depicts a katana-wielding shaman braving the snow deep in the Sokensen Mountains. The design comes from the Yamabushi of the same name, ascetic monks who take punishing voyages into the mountains in search of metaphorical death. After hiking up rocky trails in thin sandals and crushing themselves under waterfalls, they return from the mountain to leap over an open flame, which is symbolic of their rebirth. Notice the conch shell hanging from Kumano. That is called a horagai, which the Yamabushi use as a trumpet to communicate with one another across the mountains. The kitsune are another creature with origins in Japanese folklore. Thought to be benevolent messengers of the gods, these fox spirits can possess up to 9 tails, each one marking 100 years of life and symbolizing their supreme intelligence and wisdom. Many of us grew up admiring a couple of kitsune in Pokemon. In Magic, the kitsune are clerics and samurai in white, whose flavor text characterizes them as knowledgeable and compassionate and poetic. The most notable, 8.5 Tails, is among my favorite cards from all of Kamigawa. Rei Nakazawa's short story of the same name details the tragic error that befell this kitsune, which unintentionally helped Kanda initiate the Kami War. As an offering of penance, the fox cut off half of his 9th tail, deeming himself unworthy of the honor it represented. Contrasting the kitsune's benevolence are the Zubera, faceless humans who have been pulled into the Kami world with nightmarish results. Known as Noperabo, the most well-known of these ghost stories, titled Mujina, features a woman hunched over and crying, stranded on the roadside, who when offered assistance turns to reveal her completely smooth and featureless face. Miyazaki has used Noperabo in Pampoko, and more famously in Spirited Away, to great storytelling effect. The Zubera, endemic to Kamigawa, are equally mysterious and unnerving, and mechanically benefit from death. Adjacent to the terrifying Noperabo are the Goryo and the Onryo, the vengeful spirits of Japanese mythology. The most famous example in popular culture is perhaps Koji Suzuki's Ringyu, whose imagery has haunted me for decades. Kamigawa has a pair of cards inspired by this concept. The flavor text of Footsteps of the Goryo details how angry spirits are born from violent deaths, and Goryo's vengeance turns that narrative into a game mechanic. The latter card has provided countless stories and gameplay loops all its own, bringing back the dead for ruthless and game-ending attacks. And still the references continue. The more I browsed the card image gallery, the more tangents opened up, the deeper the roots became. Everything has origins somewhere, elsewhere. For instance, the Soratami, like the Zubera, derive from one story called The Tale of the Bamboo Cutter, in which an old harvester finds a princess nestled within the stalk of a severed bamboo. We learn that she comes from the moon, and after attracting the attention of the emperor, she returns home, leaving him in great sadness. The moonfolk of Kamigawa live in the clouds. Their character design evokes hair-like features, long white faces, and dangling ribbons that resemble ears, harken back to the idea that in the craters of the moon, the Japanese see not a face of a man, but the shape of a rabbit. And still, the references continue.
Kamigawa was, in a sense, a storybook world before Lorwyn was. It takes place pretty far in the past. I think that's a reason why Kamigawa stuck with me. Something about it being in the far past and it being based on a more traditional portrayal of a past setting gave it that storytelling atmosphere very strongly. And I think that's why it sort of resonated with me. So I guess I describe the world as a glimpse of the past that we as the writers, the group of us, we're trying to bring forward.
Kamigawa is old. In the literal sense, the plane has endured thousands of years, spanning deep into the past and very soon projecting far into the future. The Kami War delivered existential trauma to the living, who suffered not just their own deaths, but a schism with their faith. On the macro and in the micro, we feel the ripple effects of this crisis. from brief lines of flavor text to resounding card names and extravagant illustrations. There is a sense of scale in Kamigawa that reflects the creative team's gigantic ambition against the task presented to them. Every card offers a story, a trail that leads back to its source material, a path welcome to any who wish to follow it. At the same time, the request to build a world based on a country with centuries of art and culture and history was perhaps asking a bit too much from the medium in which it lived. Repurposing that country's spiritual practices was also, in my eyes, an unnecessary overstep. But Kamigawa endures. It has been nearly 20 years since its creation, and in that time many players have grown older and moved away from the game. Style guides have changed, and methodologies on world building have learned from the mistakes made in Magic's first major top-down world. The birth of the game's most popular format, too, is likely indebted to these 621 cards, without which I can't imagine Elder Dragon Highlander existing, at least in its current form. Soon we will return to the Jukai Forest. Growing there, slowly, will be the Sacred Mother. She will be wrapped in Shimenawa rope and stand towering above a metropolis of glowing lights, defiantly resisting the fallacy of progress and embodying the passage of time. She looks like her relatives, the great cedar trees of Japan, who, like its people, endure. The world is old. It rewards those who take time to grow. This episode was sponsored by Card Kingdom and Coalesce. Follow the links below to pick up Magic cards and merchandise. Everything you purchase directly supports the show. I'd like to extend a very special thank you to Rei Nakazawa for his time and insights. On his website, you can find all of the cards for which he wrote flavor text, both within Kamigawa and the sets surrounding it. He wanted me to tell you that he apologizes it hasn't been updated for decades, but I think that gives it all the more charm. Thank you, Ray. I've been honored to celebrate your work here. Finally, as the Patreon credits roll, I'd like to thank all my friends for breathing life into the flavor text I picked for this episode. I'll leave you with a few more, including another of my favorites from Nakazawa's portfolio, Unearthly Blizzard. Thanks so much for watching.
We are trapped. The mountains and blinding kami storms have made us hopelessly lost. We are starving. In the name of all things sacred, please send help. Lost Battalion, final message to General Takeno.
How can we hope to match the speed of lightning, the fury of storms, the power of mountains? The answer is simple. We cannot. I advise against this war. Sensei Hisoka, letter to Lord Konda.
These Nezumi, they disgust me. The things they will do for money no other thinking creature would consider. This, of course, makes them useful beyond words. Moloku, the Clouded Mirror.
Imagine a dove flying through smoke. Does the dove injure the smoke? Does the smoke impede the dove? Teachings of 8.5 Tails.
Do not fall into the trap of thinking you understand the kami. Cannot a drop of water be dew on a meadow, a glacier's thaw, or the tear of a child? Sensei Hisoka.
After his death, monks spent 10 years transcribing the tattoos from Riki's body and gathering stories from those who spoke with him. Thus the volume you hold was written, the history of Kamigawa.